All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of React Wednesdays. Cheers, everybody. I am DJ Van. I work as a developer advocate for Progress, and with me today is Dan Wilson. Dan, go and introduce yourself and show off your new holiday sweater.
Ooh.
Let's see if we can get this even more in frame. Nice. So this is a phenomenal sweater I got from my fine folks at Progress developer relations team, and it has great ninjas and samurai and kendos and whatnot. And I have to confess, I'm very toasty warm. So I'm Dan Wilson. I work with Digital Primates. We do enterprise React consulting. We also curate the enterprise React newsletter. So if that's your kind of thing, Google it. We'd love to have you.
And then our special guest today, Joe Karlsson. You want to introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, where you're from, all that good stuff?
Yes, the who, what, when, or whys.
Yeah.
So my name is Joe Karlsson. I'm a developer advocate and software engineer. I work for a company called MongoDB. I primarily do Node and JavaScript work. I'll also say, too, to give my front-end chops here, I was a front-end technical lead at a large e-commerce site. I can't say what it is, but it's blue. It's got good deals. It might be it could be a good buy. I don't know. But it was the technical lead for, which people don't know that site is the third largest e-commerce site in North America. I didn't have to work Black Friday this year for that site, which was great. But anyway, yep. I'm just glad to be here.
Yeah, this should be some fun. Mongo, we were chatting before, and I said Mongo is a good topic for me because I've always been curious and interested in it, but I've never had I don't do back-endy integration, so I've never had really hands-on experience beyond doing Hello World tutorials, essentially, right?
Totally.
So maybe for we have a lot of people that are new to development here watching in the channel as well. So maybe you could just lay out the world's simplest. What is MongoDB? Why would somebody use it? What problems does it solve? That sort of thing.
Absolutely. And I think that's super common. I feel like, especially people listening to this live stream, if you're a front-end developer, you probably heard of this database thing. You probably used it. You may or may not know exactly what it does. But yeah, so MongoDB. We've been around for forever. You've probably heard some stuff about us, but we are a NoSQL database. And that means, that stands for not only SQL. It's just like saying it's anything that's not a relational database. And specifically, we're a document store, which means we save things as JSON documents or objects in JavaScript, right? Or state management in React, right? So the benefit of that is you could save your React state directly into a MongoDB database without having to change anything because you're saving the state of your application exactly the same on the front end and back end. Which is cool. It works great for our developer brains because you can just save the data exactly they're using it. It solves a bunch of other problems, but that's one of the biggest things I think that it solves for especially front-end developers.
Yeah, it's interesting because NoSQL is not a new thing, but I feel like it's still the pace at which people switch over, especially bigger companies that are tied to these technologies for years. Because I know I got started with just straight up traditional SQL. And my brain even still works in SQL terms. So even when I look at NoSQL things, I have to do an internal translation to okay, that's how the SQL query for that would work in my brain, sort of thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like it's a good and bad thing. Everything is we don't have tables, we have collections. It's they're all one-to-one, but you have to, everyone has to do it. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing that MongoDB chose to change all the terms for it. Because it feels like you have to relearn it, even though you're kind of not.
What are the terms for Mongo? Is it collection or is it?
Yeah, collections. Database is still the same. Index are still the same. There's no rows and columns, obviously, but you have fields, and those would be equivalent to a row of data. You just have a field. You could join data by either embedding it or doing a reference with a lookup with an aggregation pipeline. So you can still do it, but it's not called to join. A lot of stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost feels like they hid joins from developers. And if you come from the relational background, you're used to third normal form of about everything, and don't repeat
100%.
data, use references. That's kind of the way to go. But in a document database, it seems like you kind of want to unwind at least part of your data so you can grab it all in one document. Can you kind of talk through what that's like making that transition?
Yes, I actually I literally just published a blog post on this like yesterday. It's I'm going to share this in the chat here if I can find it. It's
if you toss it in the private chat, I can pass it along.
Yes, I can't do it. Perfect. There we go. MongoDB schema design best practice, and I see this all the time, and it's the number one thing I see people make mistakes when they're coming from an SQL background to MongoDB, because everyone tries to design their MongoDB documents like a normalized third form database. But yeah, it doesn't take advantage. So I want to be clear here. MongoDB does support joins, or you can reference other documents and other collections. That is totally possible. It's I always recommend try to avoid it if you can. I try to embed the data if I possibly can, and then as I work out the design schema, I try to I can pull it apart. The hard part is there's no rules, there's no process, and there's no algorithm like there is for normalizing data with an SQL database. The only thing that really matters is designing a schema that's depending on how you're going to use it. So when I'm using it, I'm typically I'm putting all the data I need really quickly in the documents. I can make really fast queries, and I have to start splitting it up. That's okay too. But I want to split up things I need less often into those sub documents or whatever.
So instead of the database kind of preserving your referential integrity, you almost have to do it at the application layer.
Yeah, some of it. When you're designing a schema, you have to tell it. You would have to do the same thing too with an SQL database. ORMs exist to help make that easier. You lose some control over how the data is actually being split up, but just this application layer is handling that for you. But so yeah, there's it's the same thing. It's just the ORM layer, which can be beefy and cause issues too. But you still have to you'd have to maintain those relationships. If you want to query it, you have to go and query the subdocuments. But like I said, you'd have to do the same thing in SQL if you're not using an ORM.
So I have even a higher level question. Are there certain types of apps that are better suited to something like Mongo or worse suited? If you have a lot of data, would that be a better or worse fit? Or
yeah. I'm sure you guys are consultants, right? It depends, right? It depends on your application.
Yeah.
And I typically use a couple different, I'll use so for if I'm building a front end application and I'm building my own auth store, I'll typically use MongoDB to save user metadata. But I'll typically use Redis or a key value store, which is a different type of NoSQL database to save session IDs for login credentials and stuff like that. So yeah, there's different use cases, or a graph database may work well for some others if you want to handle really complex nebulous relationships or but I think generally speaking, MongoDB does most it's a general purpose database. I think it solves most of the problems you would need with it, and there are specific use cases where you wouldn't. But the other thing you want to think about too is money. I think obviously with scaling up, the big thing too with MongoDB, it does horizontal scaling. And if you haven't heard of that, there's vertical and horizontal scaling. And if you're vertically scaling, let's say you're on an SQL database and you run out of space on your 30 terabyte hard drive. You have to go buy a 40 terabyte hard drive, copy all that data over to that other one. You may have some downtime, and then you start using that database. But with MongoDB, you can buy a bunch of small ones, small hard drives, and just put them side by side. There's no downtime. You can just split that data up sideways. That tends to be cheaper at massive scales. Yeah, scalability, money.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, because if you drill into that and kind of think about how you'd scale a relational database, the wrong answer is just add more database servers.
Yeah.
You're just going to end up with a replication mess. But Mongo has a really nice way of allowing that to happen, where you can kind of split reads and writes and add more servers, and they sort of elect themselves. And talk through that, because I found that to be very interesting and also useful, because stuff happens in the real world, and it's nice if your database platform can kind of roll with the punches and do the right thing versus just fall over and die.
Oh, totally. Yeah, absolutely. I think databases, admittedly, aren't the sexiest part of an application. I rarely hear devs bragging about their sexy schema design or their awesome database architecture. But data is one of the most important parts of a business application. If your database got canned, your business, you could go out, you could lose all your user data. And whoops, we deleted all of your Instagram posts, and that's never coming back. You know what I mean? That would suck. But yeah, so yeah, replication is super huge. So yeah, like I wish I could. I had like a whiteboard or something here. I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I should just have a whiteboard
in the background.
For this. God. Next time. Christmas. I'll ask for that for Christmas this year.
There you go.
Yeah. So like we talked about like horizontally sharding, which is not sharting with a T. It's sharding with a D. Don't get those confused. But yeah, so you like horizontally scale those. So you have like a bunch of different smaller MongoDB databases, but you want to make sure you're replicating that. And typically you have two replicated databases per shard. So it starts scaling up pretty quickly. But MongoDB is really good about like re-electing if one goes down, or like you can choose like how much of that data gets propagated to the replicated shards before it like confirms a write or a read. You can settle that stuff too. But yeah, replication's super huge. And I'm gonna be honest here too, like all this stuff, like I feel like myself and most developers included don't really give a shit about those details. Like we just want to like save some data and get it back relatively quickly.
Yeah,
Like,
that's basically it. And really early on in my career, I was kind of motivated to get a good salary. And so I'd look at all these salaries on dice.com. This is back in the day, but we all have a little gray around our temples. And database administrators were making the cake, man. They were making money. And I'm like, I think I want to do that. And so I talked to a friend of mine who I respect a lot. His name's Skip Krennick. And I said, hey, Skip, what do you think about being a DBA? And he says, look, let me kind of divide the two jobs for you into terms you'll appreciate. There's joy jobs and there's no joy jobs. Because if you're an application developer and you build an application or update an application to help someone save like 100 hours worth of their work per year, you're their hero. They'll keep a little picture next to you on their desk and thank it from time to time because you've added joy to their life.
Yes.
However, no one's ever going to call you and say, Dan, the database is running great today. Thank you so much for your work. It's always like, hey, it's 3:45 in the morning and something didn't work right. Get out of bed and fix it. And I'm like, I guess that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, and security is the same way too. It's like no one gives a shit about security unless there's a breach or something goes wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. And DevOps is a little bit like that too. Like DevOps is I feel like that's where the money's at right now. But yeah, it's like, it's kind of behind the scenes a little bit.
Standard is perfection.
I'd
and
say
anything but that is noticed.
I think the same thing applies for DevOps though too, because no one's going to call you and say like that deployment was just
smooth.
It's like it was great, right? They're just going to call you and say like I can't get this app out. Users are complaining, right? Like it's too slow. It's Black Friday and the site's not loading. Hey, what are you going to do about it?
I totally agree. And like I love having a smooth DevOps like deployment. Like that's nice, but customers don't give a shit about how smooth your DevOps process is at all. You know.
Yep.
I'm gonna be like database administrators. I feel like that's a role that's kind of disappearing a little bit. Like there's still need for like database specialists and stuff like that, but this is wild speculation and it doesn't reflect any of the views of my employers here.
Hang on, I'm tweeting this. Keep going.
Tweet at CEO. It shows wild speculation. No, I feel like because everything's moving to the cloud now, and like as developers, like everyone expects it to be easier, and I feel like the database that's going to win the database, like the next database wars, is going to be the one that's like easier to use and like requires as little human intervention as humanly possible.
Totally. That's totally it.
And I feel like as we're moving to the cloud, like it's data. Like you can run like massive machine learning things on like we're already doing this in MongoDB. Like if you're running your stuff here, like we give you like index performance analyzers, we auto scale, we do like you just save your data up there and we'll take care of it for you. We're giving like recommendations that human actually has to do now. Like, hey, we're seeing you making this query a lot. You don't have this indexed. You'd save, your queries would have an increased performance of 70% if you.
That's kind of slick.
You know what I mean? Yeah. But if it could do that for you automatically, like I'm talking next 5-10 years, like I would not be shocked to see if like we have fully like AI cloud managed database systems that humans don't have to touch much.
I remember I worked with a large education provider that shall remain nameless, and there was like this sort of defining event in the database administrator's life there. We'd moved everything from like real hardware over to Amazon's RDS service.
Yeah.
And my experiences with that team went from, hey guys, I really need this backup. It's been 5 days. Hey guys, I really need this backup. You're holding up 25 people from working, to, oh, you need a backup? Yeah, we'll handle it right now. Because so much had been sort of cruft work had been taken off their plates that they could actually focus on what A, required a human, and B, providing the services to the other organization. And that
100%.
the ability for the machine to get involved and automate these processes, like they weren't making batch jobs anymore. They weren't having to do manual restores. It was just sort of push a button. And I think, if you look around the room, there's not a whole lot of out of work DBAs. There's still plenty of need for them. They're just doing higher level work.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they're not manually doing these scripts, and they're like, it's just all being more and more automated. And I don't think that trend is going to stop anytime.
Let's hope not. And if you look at something like Mongo, where a fair amount of control gets in the hands of the application developer, there's less need to engage teams that have other priorities right now. You see, I mean, you can own your own sort of timelines because you can handle the things you need to do for the database because, like I say, Mongo allows you to do that as an app developer, and it does a lot of stuff for you, like the scaling and the sharding and all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And which this React developers, like I'm a front-end developer too. Like I just when I don't love having to worry about infrastructure or scaling up. If I deploy a little goofy app, I don't have to worry about scaling the database up in 6 months, or you know what I mean. I just want to deploy it and forget that I just want it to work for forever.
That could maybe be a good transition too, because I'm totally in the same boat, and my next questions would be like, how do you get started, right, for your average React developers? So I know you wanted to show us off an app, but now be a good time to go ahead and bring that up and take a look.
Absolutely. Yeah, this actually would be good too. Like I've been thinking a lot about like 2021 tech stack and like what I'm using and like predictions for next year. This app is a good example of kind of a typical app I'm building. It's a little bit different. I built this probably 6 months ago. Or last March. I don't even know. Time doesn't exist anymore. I don't know what's happening. I feel like for me, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts too on like what you think is going to be hot next year, especially in like the React front end space. But I feel like static front ends is huge, like Next.js type stuff or Netlify, like just static React components. And then even like right now, like for me, easiest, scalable, cheapest option has just been a serverless backend. Like I'm typically getting some data from a database. I just set up a serverless endpoint, and then I work MongoDB, so I'm saving all my data in MongoDB. But I just hit that with a serverless endpoint. It's super cheap, it's scalable, and it's like very minimal amount of work to get it working.
I think like there's almost like a rush to create like the Ruby on Rails for React, right?
Yeah.
Like people like React, but they once you start to need things like server-side rendering and such, those things aren't built into React proper. So you either need to roll your own, which is not the easiest thing in the world, or you use something like Next. And there's other ones too. I forget the names. Like I feel like it's the hip thing to do to try to build on that sort of spectrum of project solutions, whatever. So because Gatsby is a little bit different, but also kind of related.
Yeah.
And I think it's driven, like you said, Netlify has gotten like these solutions for actually hosting and putting these things up have gotten so much better in the last year or two also, that like you can take these frameworks and integrate them with these backends, and it's quite powerful what you can do now by just like hitting like essentially file new app, right?
100%. But you nailed it though. Like, and again, like back to my database point, like the person who's going to win the React like framework wars is going to be the one who does it easy, like makes the experience easier and better than anyone else. I think Netlify is like getting close there. Like it should just like, so this app is built in Create React app, which is super easy, but it's still like the deployment piece is still kind of like I still have to like build it and then I have to host it, statically host it somewhere.
Yeah,
cool. But yeah, Netlify just like they handle it all for you. I always feel like weirdly, like I feel okay. So I'd be curious what you guys think on this too. But like having like I like having it be easy, but I don't want it to be too magical. And I like seeing the parts, but I also think that can make it harder to get. Like I think Meteor, I think struggled that it was a little too magical. It was like kind of a little abstract, like, but it was so easy to use. I don't know. I don't know where that balance is. Do you guys have any thoughts on?
Yeah, I remember Meteor. Me and a buddy of mine who's probably watching right now went to a Meteor meetup, and I'd learned some Mongo and whatnot. And it was pretty cool because the client side and the database were all linked up, and you could do like really rapid development with it. But the problem was it sort of shipped the schema and the control to the front end. And so while we're sitting there, And apologies if the guy who did the presentation was listening, but he wasn't very good at what he did and kept making the same points over and over again. It was really kind of boring. So I started hacking around the application and ended up changing his demo app to some completely ridiculous stuff, figuring they'd switch back to it and I'd get a big laugh. 2 hours later, they'd never switch back to the screen. So as he and I were walking out of the room, we'd gotten around the corner. All of a sudden, the room busts out in the laughter. And I think that highlights the issue that, if you start doing magic stuff, someone has to support this. And can you imagine rolling out some important application with Meteor and being naive about it? And next thing you know, someone's just changing your data for you from the client side with no controls.
100%. Yeah, totally. Yep.
I think
the
hard
appropriate
part
amount of magic is good, but at the same time, that 345 call is going to come and you need to know what to do.
Yeah, and it's too abstracted away. Yeah.
I think once you get servers and databases involved, those like any sort of magic becomes, the stakes get higher. Because if I use it in like a little JavaScript framework and I want to rip it out, chances are if you're using a framework for your whole app, that's one thing. But if you're just using some like little utility, swapping that out is easy. It's different when like Meteor, if you decide that's not working out for you, well, crap, your entire app is coupled to that. There are no like pieces you can abstract out of that. So, and like even with Next, it's like it's almost like finding a balance, because at one end you're still building a React app, so you still have that. And if you decided to move away from Next, well, you could reconcile some of that, I suppose.
Totally.
But
you could rip those components out.
Yeah,
exactly.
Finding that mix, finding what you're comfortable with. It depends on how much risk you're willing to take on for whatever it is you happen to be building, because the equation is totally different if you're building like a little side project or like a personal thing that's not a big deal, or you're building something that you intend to be around for 5-10 years for some major company. It sort of changes the equation too.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree. I'm just thinking out loud right now, but I feel like the balance is like, I want sane defaults that are like, I can just run a script and it'll work without having to like sit and config a file for 5 hours, like a Webpack file, which is just like a pain in the ass to get working for the first time.
Yep.
But yeah, I still want to have that option to be able to change it. Like, I don't know. ESLint, I think, is doing pretty great with that. Like, you can just install it and it starts linting, cool. But then if you want to start like getting super custom with it, like, I feel like I want that kind of experience. I don't know.
So what's the experience like for Mongo in here? Like so if I'm React developer, right? I just hello worlded my React app and I want to use Mongo. Like, what's the very first thing I do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Let's see here. Blah, blah, blah. Let's go through let me show you what this app does first of all, and then we can jump through. So I just want to give you a preview.
Yep, sounds good.
Let's see. Looks like that got changed. I'm using, so I just got this set up this morning. It's what file am I in? Hang on a sec. Let me so I'm using, this is the first time I've used I'm on Windows and I'm using the Windows Ubuntu subsystem.
Yeah, I have that installed and use it. It's pretty awesome-ish.
Yeah, it's like, it's not as integrated as like a Mac environment, which is what I'm used to working on, but like, and it gets the job done because I like Unix-like environments, but there's still some magic I don't really get. That's what's happening.
Yeah, sometimes you can't get there from here with it.
Let's see here. I gotta re-go into this. But it's been pretty smooth. But it's like running a VM or something on Windows. It's just like something always gets weird with it. It's not super smooth yet, but it works. Okay, so let me jump in here. Let me start my thing, and then I'll show you the file. Okay.
Yeah, speaking of things just working in magic, while that's coming up, I'll point out, I don't know if you saw me messing with the camera earlier, but right as TJ turned the video off, I was making my desk go from sit to stand mode, and it stopped about halfway through at the most awkward point for my back. And so I'm trying to stay in frame and try to fix it.
Squatting.
And it's not where I can make it through an hour without needing a chiropractor. I think we're good now. But...
Oh, that's too good. Okay, cool. So this is a React application built with the Create React app, and it's using it's like I call it InstaPost. It's an Instagram clone basically. So let me show you how it works. It's nothing fancy. You can do just basic CRUD operations for some posts. So I'm gonna have an image URL, and this is a home home alone, and it's hitting a GraphQL endpoint, a GraphQL serverless endpoint, and it's all the data is being hosted on MongoDB database. So you can see here, upload new post. I can click on it, and I can. Looks like someone deleted some stuff here, so I'm just going to clean up these old posts. Yeah, so pretty simple. It's just a little basic CRUD app, right? The hello world of making things. Yeah, let's go through some stuff here. I also do want to show this too. So I'm hosting all this on MongoDB Atlas. It's our cloud hosted option. We have a always free tier. And this is this is a free little demo on here, or free database, which is awesome, free forever. But let's take a look at it. I have one collection. It just has the posts, and it's saving metadata for those posts. I do want to show you the GraphQL setup though really fast after we go through these collections. So yeah, I just have insta posts, the posts, and then you'll see, hopefully, once these load up, the Home Alone document we just threw in there. There it is. Ooh. So you save that into our database. Great. I'll make this a little bit bigger. Oh my gosh. That's too big. Cool. Let's see here. I just want to show you this too. You can do remember I was talking about having computers help you make better decisions. We tell you anti-patterns now. And we have a performance advisor built in, so we'll give you index suggestions in real time, which is super cool. But cool. Let's see here. Also, so the serverless option is a ton of those. TJ and I talked about those last time on the podcast. But
I wasn't actually at the podcast. So in terms of the way that the architecture is set up, you have a React app that's running locally that's hitting this GraphQL endpoint that you set up through Mongo tier somehow. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. So I'll show you that right now. So I'm gonna show you the code real fast. But yeah, so I have a MongoDB now. You can actually hit this button, generate GraphQL schema, and it will just make a GraphQL endpoint for you based on your data, because we know the data types of all of your documents. So we can make all the CRUD operations for your data, and you could put rules on it or whatever, which is what I did here. So you can see I have a query defined. MongoDB already does this for you. And you can see those in real time here. So that's what I'm doing. It's a serverless endpoint that sits on top of my MongoDB database in the cloud. And then I have a GraphQL layer that that allows me to interact with that serverless endpoint. That's all in there. So you can do this with anything, but obviously I work for MongoDB, so this is the space I'm working in the most often these days. But okay,
and so as
cool.
a React developer, all I have to do is set up an account here and configure it, and you'll handle everything else for me?
Yes. Actually, so let me send you, where did the code go? Let me send you the code for this, and TJ, I'll have you save it. Yep. But the README for this goes through all of the how-to for this. Yeah, you just set up an account. It's free forever. If I would recommend to, the way I learn how to do new things is I'll set up a starting place. I'll have code to and I get a hello world working for that I know works, and then I'll start changing that to fit the requirements of whatever project I'm trying to build. It's kind of how I set up something. I want a known working start, and this is a good place to start if you want to do React, serverless, GraphQL. Okay, should we talk about what is GraphQL really fast too, for people who may not know from the front end community?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm curious, TJ or Dan, have you guys used GraphQL before? It's okay if you haven't. Just
I've done once again, the basics,
sure.
sort of take around. There's the GraphQL playground, and I've toyed around with a little bit. Honestly, to me, it's a little bit overwhelming. Because I've been doing things with just straight up REST for 15 years now at this point, right? So I'm a little bit old man, don't touch with my tech that I understand so well a bit on it.
Yep. No, I love that. Let's see here. I actually have I have a deck here. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I do want to just start. This is a good one to start on. Start from current slide. Okay. Cool. So yeah, I think TJ, I think you bring up a good point. That's kind of a common experience. I think that it's kind of overwhelming when you first start with it. But walk with me here. I think it helps to illustrate where GraphQL excels by walking through where no, thank you. Every time I open PowerPoint now, it does this. I don't know why. Like where REST APIs kind of don't work really well. So everyone listening in the chat, everyone here, like imagine the situation. So let's imagine you're on a front-end development team and you're showing recent orders from a user, and so you have a back-end developer. He has an endpoint that gives you the recent orders. It returns an array of like order IDs. Cool. So we're just putting order IDs on the page, not a problem. But hold up, your project manager says to you, the front-end developer, like, we have actually changed our requirements. I want you to show like a hydrated list of orders. So it's not just the order numbers, because users don't care about that. We want to see like order date and the order, all the products that were ordered in there, and the price, invoice, whatever. Okay, so as a front-end developer, like we have to go work with our back-end developers and ask what's the best way to update our API. So this is the part where like we start talking about like there's no consistent way to do it, right? Like you can make a new endpoint called hydrated recent orders or hydrate SKUs, or maybe you put a query parameter on the end that says hydrated equals true, or maybe you put that query parameter in the headers, hide that, and then make the request that way. But the point is there's no consistent way to do that, and making changes is really challenging for REST APIs. Also too, like, and this is a real world example, like I got this, I had to do this once with the order IDs. And then what I would have to do is make multiple round trips to get the order IDs, and make another request back to the server to hydrate those, receive those back, and then I'll display that. So it's making 2 round trips between the client and the server to display that.
Sounds a bit clunky.
Yeah, and I think we all have experienced that too. Like maybe you have to go and get a bunch of data from a bunch of different endpoints, and you maybe hit it a couple times, but the user's waiting the entire time for that, right?
All right.
So GraphQL works a little bit differently. It's a single REST endpoint. You just tell it all the data you want to get from that single endpoint, and it goes and gets it
for progress.
And then it brings it back to you.
With me today is Dan Wilson. Dan,
it's a consistent way to ask those.
And
if you
show
have
off
changes,
your
you can do
new
those
holiday sweater.
And you don't have to hit multiple endpoints. You just hit a single
See if we can
endpoint.
get this
to
even
go
more
and do that.
ingrained.
Which is kind of nice, and it's
So
REST.
nice.
It's just a defined
This
way
is
to
a
do
phenomenal sweater I
All the
got
requests
from my
get
fine folks
bottleneck
at
from one
Progress.
endpoint, and then
Developer relations team,
request,
and it has great ninjas.
that. Yeah, so that's like the
Samurai and
GraphQL.
Kendos
So GraphQL isn't
whatnot.
actually tech.
And I
it's
have
a
to confess, I'm
specification.
very
So it says,
toasty
like,
warm.
It tells you
So I'm
how
Dan
this
Wilson.
single
I work
REST
with
API
Digital
should be
Primates.
made.
We
Like, how do you
enterprise
write a
React
GraphQL
consulting.
endpoint? So GraphQL
We also
endpoint
curate the
here is the
enterprise
same
React
as
newsletter.
here.
So if that's your kind of
This
thing,
is
Google
there.
it. We love that.
But, so let's take a look at it. Like a
And then
request looks
our
like
special
this,
guest
right?
today,
I
Joe.
want to get
Joe
all of the
Karlsson.
hero
You want to
data
introduce
from the
yourself?
Star
Tell
Wars
everybody
Swap
who you
API.
are, where you're from, all that good stuff.
As a front
Yes,
developer,
the who, what,
I don't
when, where,
care
why.
where it is,
Yeah.
who maintains
Yeah,
that
so
server.
my name
I
is
just
Joe
say, like,
Karlsson.
I want
I'm a
this
developer
information and
advocate
want
and
this
software
data.
engineer. I work for a company
get
called
nothing more,
MongoDB.
nothing less.
I
don't want to
primarily
change
do
that, and
Node
I
and
have to go to the
JavaScript
backend
work.
team and like ask them to make changes. I can
I'll
just
also say too, to
change
give
my
my
request with the data I need.
front end chops here, I was a front end
So instead
technical
of the
lead at
API being a contract,
a
of what
large
we get
e-commerce
and what we
site.
give, this is
I
more,
can't say what it is, but it's
asking you shall
blue.
receive.
It's got
Exactly,
good
it's
deals. Maybe
declarative.
It's like one of the. It's like SQL, right?
Could
Like
be a
I don't
goodbye.
care. I don't know
Where
and how. Just I.
but,
just
it
give
was
me
the
that.
technical lead
for which people don't know
And
that
since
site is the
And
third
since
largest
GraphQL,
e-commerce
it's just a
site in North America.
specification,
I didn't
right?
have to
So
work Black Friday
presumably
this year for
then
that site,
on
which
the
was
Mongo
great.
end, you all had to write
But,
something
anyway, yeah.
Just glad to
that
be here.
acts as like the server that
Yeah,
parses
this should be some fun.
the syntax that
Mongo,
comes in
I was we were chatting
actually
before.
goes out to the
Mongo's a good
database,
topic
gets
for
it,
me
puts it
because
in
I've
the correct
always
format
been
and backs it up.
curious and interested in it, but
And
I've
like
never
any
had
other
like
database
I don't do
provider would
like
have to do the
back-end
same with their
integration,
own.
so I've never had really
stack
hands-on
underneath,
experience
but it's
beyond
just
doing
consistent like translation,
like
layer
hello
almost,
world tutorials,
like
essentially, right?
for passing
Totally.
back and forth. Maybe for we have a lot of
And
people
I
that
want
are
to clear
new
too,
to
like
development
GraphQL, like you
here
can use multiple,
watching in the
I think it
channel
really
as well.
shines when
So
using
maybe you
lots
could
of
just
different
lay out
databases,
the
too.
world's
Like,
simplest.
you can hit
What
a
is
SQL
MongoDB?
database,
Why would somebody use it? What
cloud
problems does it
database on
solve?
AWS,
That sort of thing.
one on
Absolutely.
Azure, or
And
whatever.
I think that's super
MongoDB,
common.
right?
I feel like, especially
and
people listening to this,
even though they're all
this
coming
live
from
stream,
different APIs,
like if you're a front-end
databases
developer,
still
you probably
being
like
presented
part of this
database
I want-
thing you probably used.
as
Presumably,
may or
you'd
may
still
not
need
know
someone to wire
exactly
that
what it
up,
does.
right?
Yes,
Like,
absolutely.
But yeah, so like this layer, because like
We've been around for
typically what's
forever.
happening
You
is
probably heard
like
some stuff about us, but
back-end
we are
development
a
teams are
NoSQL
like developing
database,
APIs,
and they're only here. And that means that stands for not only SQL. It's just like saying
it's like
anything that's not there. So like they're making APIs, they're making the Swagger documentation, which means we save things as like JSON. In my experience, backend developers or like statement, it's a little extra work because they need to React, right? So like the benefit of that is like you can save your React state. Like it tends to be front end developers who are MongoDB database without having to change a GraphQL endpoint. And a lot of times that's information. Exactly the same option. Same on the front end and back end leadership to get on, which is cool. Like, it works great for our. It's another like developer layer of abstraction that the backend teams have to get into. It solves a bunch of other problems.
I can see it could help you move faster because I've definitely been in those situations before where you get to the point where I mean, NoSQL is not through a new thing, but I feel like it's still like okay, well, let's design this API. Switch over, especially like bigger companies that are tied halfway into the project. You realize, okay, this I know I got started with just back and forth, straight up traditional SQL, and my brain even still works in SQL terms. So even when I look at NoSQL things, I have to like do an internal translation to like, oh, okay, that's how like the like SQL query for that would work in my brain, sort of thing.
And
I totally agree. I feel like it's a good and bad thing. Like everything is like we don't have tables, we have collections. It's like they're all one to one, but like you have to
than it is.
Everyone has to do it. I don't know if it's a good or bad thing that
one app that
MongoDB chose to like
bunches of data
change all the terms for it.
There's a
It
set
feels like you have to
number of
relearn it, even though you're like kind of
applications.
What are the terms for Mongo? Is it collection or is it?
Yeah, collections. Database is still the same. Index are still the same. Like there's no rows. Yeah, it's like it's a work up front, but it fields, and those would be equivalent to like a row of data. You just have like a field. I want to show you like you don't have to join data by either embedding it or for you. This is an app where I wrote my own node server and my own. You can still do it, but it's not called a join. So like I'm defining that you define the types of what. Yeah,
and it almost feels like they hid joins from developers.
You want to say if someone requests
if you come from
to
a
delete
relational background, you're used to third normal.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can you blow it up a bit? That's good.
Data, use reference. It's like TJ's catchphrase, but in a document database, it seems like you kind of want to unwind.
For streaming, I totally get
part of your data.
You're saying like if someone tries to do this, like delete a to-do item,
what that's
you
like
resolve it by doing this thing. And I'm saying yes, I actually going to literally just publish a blog collection and I'm deleting one thing using the ID that's being passed. I'm going to share this in the chat here. If I again, we handle all this for you, but if you're making your own,
if you toss it in the private chat, I can pass it along.
Can't do it perfect. There we go.
Point.
Yeah,
MongoDB Schema is best practice. And I see this all the time. Any thoughts on whether REST versus GraphQL is better for change management on long-lived evolving apps?
Yeah, everyone tries to have thoughts on this. I design their MongoDB. In my experience, I've done normalized. I led the conversion at this large e-commerce company of database. Yeah, it doesn't take advantage. So I want to be clear. It was massively beneficial. MongoDB does support joins. Because the app's change, right? But if like the front end developer has the ability to change in real time, it's like I always recommend like try to avoid it. I just can like I try to add that as data request and I don't have to go, and then I work out that change schema. I try to like I can pull it apart. It's easier to change. The hard part is there's no rules, there's no process, and there's no algorithm like there is for. Yeah, it just makes it so much more. The only thing that matters there's a lot of the benefits I'm getting into today, but depending on how you're going to use it. So like when I'm using it, I'm typically like I'm putting all the data.
Well, and presumably, so we were looking at the Mongo backend, and there's a way to get GraphQL. Presumably, you have some other way of like generating just traditional REST requests as well for people that are more interested in
the
that.
database.
100%. Yeah. So like we call it Realm, which is awesome. It's our like serverless. Like no one knows about it. Yeah, some of it. Like I mean, when you're designing a schema, you have to like so you can do you would have the typical like AWS Lambda functions. ORMs exist to like help make serverless functions. You lose some control over like how the data is actually split up. Just this application integrate with other services, or you just do a traditional. So yeah, there's like hit this endpoint. It's the same thing. It's just like the ORM users can be /10 or something to get whatever how you define that. But you still have to like you can totally do that. Maintain those relationships. If you want to query,
so
it,
then,
like, you have to like go and query the subdocument.
So then back to the post app, where does all this come in?
Yes, good question. So
I can even a higher level question. Are there certain types of apps that are better suited to something like Mongo or worse suited? Like if you have a lot of data, would that be a better or worse fit? Or
like I'm sure you guys are consultants. So it depends, right? It depends. You see here, this is my like And like I typically use a couple different. Like I'll use like the stitch. So like if I'm building a front end application and I'm building out its been stored, I'll typically use MongoDB to like. So we're basically like wrapping it our entire application. But I'll typically use like Redis or like a key value store, which is the actual NoSQL database to like save session IDs for like login credentials and stuff like that. So yeah, like. There's different use cases, or like a graph database may work well for some others. If you want to,
so we're just doing an anonymous login. So like, just like
we have to have we create a token. I think generally speaking, MongoDB does most like it's a general purpose database. I think it solves most of the problems.
Where is
the and there are specific use cases where they're
passing through
the other thing you want to think about too is like money.
Well, since I've been in here,
like,
I'm trying to find the. Here we go.
The big thing too with MongoDB does
this
horizontal
part that
like scaling.
About.
And if you haven't heard of it, remember Graphql is a single API endpoint.
You have a
and if you're
single
vertically scaling, let's say like
what
you're
we're doing
on
is
an
we're
SQL
instantiating
database
that is
and
we're creating
you run out of space on
a
your
client
30 terabyte hard drive.
We're using Apollo, which is actually
you have to go buy a 40 terabyte hard drive.
But you
Copy
just
all that
pass
data
it
over
that
to
single
that other
endpoint,
one.
which has
MongoDB, we give that to you. It's like here's your serverless GraphQL. MongoDB, you can buy like
just
a
gotta
bunch of
paste
small
this in.
ones.
But we're saying like we want to just connect
side to this endpoint. So we're going to be sending all of our GraphQL requests to that thing. And since we've wrapped that around our entire application, all of our subcomponents, scalability, money, be able to like make changes.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point because if you drill into that and kind of think about how you scale a relational database,
we're telling our
the wrong
application
answer
this is where
just
the
add more
endpoint is, the
database.
single GraphQL endpoint.
Just getting up to the replication.
We're going
match.
to route all
Mongo
of our
has a really
GraphQL
nice
requests
way
to
of
this point.
allowing that to happen, where you can kind of split
we're also using something called
rights and
Apollo.
add more servers
And
sort of
Apollo is
elect
a
themselves. Talk through that because I found that to be very interesting and also useful because stuff happens in the real world.
Here we go.
And it's nice if your database.
Okay, so
platform can
Apollo
kind of roll
actually
the punches
wraps
and do the
our
right thing
it can
versus
wrap
just fall over
it's
and die.
front end framework agnostic, but
yeah,
it
it
makes
makes
working
with GraphQL APIs much easier.
I think
So
databases
kind of
like admittedly
our
aren't the
front end
sexiest
components
part of an application. I rarely hear
more easily.
and devs bragging about their sexy schema.
Let me show you what
There
their awesome
Check out.
database architecture. Like, but I mean, the data is also one of the most important parts of business
And you
applications.
said that was
if your
that was by
database
the
got
Meteor
canned,
team?
like, yes, yeah. So
Your
like
business
from the
could go
ashes
up.
of Meteor, you lose all your
Really?
user data. Whoops, we deleted all of your
I guess it makes sense with
Instagram posts, and that's
Yeah, I
never
suppose
coming
with the
back. You know what I
name,
mean? Like
like, I
that
didn't
would
even
suck.
connect the
But yeah,
dots
so yeah,
there.
replication's super
But
huge.
yeah, it kind of makes
yeah, like,
sense.
I wish I could. Yeah, they pivoted to it because I think they were like trying to figure that out because they were like, I hadn't thought about that. Just have a glue between
In the background,
MongoDB
yeah.
database Meteor and the front end components, and by the end of Meteor's life cycle, they asked for that for Christmas this year.
There
You
you
could
go.
put any framework you want.
yeah,
so like we talked about like horizontal Angular. So I think that like it's not sharding. I don't know the intimate details of that, but I do know. Don't get those confused. Was there?
But
yeah, so you
next
like
go.
horizontally scale those. So you have like a
It
bunch
is
of different
Apollo
smaller
free
MongoDB
to
databases.
use,
You want to
or
make sure you're
like
replicating that.
okay,
Yes.
Typically, you have
yes, it is.
Yeah,
Two replicated replication.
Yep. I replicated.
tried doing this app
databases
without Apollo.
per
If you're
shard.
new to GraphQL, I just
So it started scaling up pretty
Apollo.
quickly.
Just
But
I'll
MongoDB
show
is
you
really good
why.
about, like,
You don't have to worry
redirecting,
about like
one goes down or like
requests or
you can
anything,
choose like how
because
much
Apollo
the
knows
data
where it
gets
gets
propagated to the
propagated.
replicated shards before it like
So
confirms
let's look at, like,
a write or a read.
Here we go. Okay, so this is the cool part about it. Actually, I want to just go to.
And I'm gonna be honest here too. Like all this stuff, like I feel like myself and
Apollo
most developers
comes
included
prepackaged
don't really
with
give a shit about those
reactions.
details. Like we just want to like
So we're just
save
saying
some
like,
data,
hey,
you get it
we
back
want to make a query
relatively
so we're
quickly
just
pulling from Apollo, and it's gonna make
Yeah,
make
that's
it really
basically it.
easy
And
for us.
really early on in my
Um,
career,
And then
I was
here
looking
I'm using
at-
a package
I was
called
kind of
GraphQL
motivated
tag,
to get a
and
good
it allows us
salary.
to like
So I look at all these
like
salaries
GraphQL
on
query
dice.com.
as
Back
a
in the
literal.
day, but we all have a little
Cool.
gray around
And
our temples.
Apollo takes care of all the
And,
rest. I'm just saying like this is
Database
the query.
administrators were making
and we're
the
gonna pass
cake,
this
man.
through
They
to
were
the
making
user
money.
queries
And I'm
up
like, I
here.
think I want to do
I'm
that.
actually
And
gonna
so I
show you what
talked
that
to a
looks
friend
like,
of
right?
mine
So we have
who I
this,
respect a lot. His name's Skip Krennick.
we're
and I
just
said,
going to
"Hey,
pass
Skip,
through
I'm
that
looking
query
back
we
in
defined here.
today."
Yeah,
He
the
says,
use
"Look, let
query
me kind of
Apollo
divide the
wrapped
two jobs for you.
And then that
to-
returns
to
3 states.
terms
floating
to
error
appreciate.
data.
There's joy
And we
jobs.
can
and
render
there's no
React
joy
components
jobs.
depending on the state.
If you're an application
Apollo
developer and
gets
you
back
build
to
an
us.
application or
Zero.
update an
So loading
application to help someone
something
save
errors
like
out, I
100
just show
hours
error,
worth of
and
their
then
work per
if all
year,
goes well,
you're their
I just put the
hero.
data
They'll
and
keep a
pass it
little
through
picture
across
next to
the-
you on their desk and thank it from time to time because you've added joy to their life.
Which is pretty easy.
However,
So you just,
no
like,
one's
you
ever
don't have
going
to
to
know any
call you and
magic.
say,
It just
Dan,
says
the
like, go
database is
here,
running
send this
great
query
today.
here.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much
go
for
to
your
the
work.
same
It's always like, hey, it's
Can you go up to that
3:45 in the
find
morning
all
and something didn't
Insta
work right. Get out of bed and
Yes.
fix it.
Okay.
And I'm like,
Yeah,
I
so
guess
that's
that
the
makes
thing,
a lot
like,
of sense.
that
Oh, you're
the
and security is the same way
backend
too. It's
will
like,
help
no one gives a shit about security unless there's
right?
like,
Like
yes.
presumably you
Wrong.
didn't handwrite that.
Yeah, no, I
DevOps
didn't.
is
Let
a
me
little bit
show
like
you
that too.
Like
So
DevOps
you
is
talked
the
about
big.
you've
I feel like
used the
that's where I'm at
GraphQL
right now. But yeah,
hub
it's
a
like
little bit.
or like for playing around. It's
the-
kind of behind
the
the scenes.
standard is
So I'm gonna
perfection.
show that.
I'd
And
say that
anything but that is
What
noticed.
TJ was talking
I think
about
the same
is
thing
one of
applies for
one of the cool
DevOps
parts
though
about
too, because
GraphQL
no
is
one
you no
one's
longer
going to
need
call you and say
documentation,
like that
because
deployment
GraphQL comes
was
packaged with a
just
smooth
it's like it was
Very
great,
bold statement.
right? They're
I
just
know,
going
I
to
don't
call
think-
you
I
and
don't
say
think they
like
put
I
that on
can't
their,
get this
like,
app
website
out. Users are
tagline.
complaining, right?
Like you don't need
it's
Swagger
slow.
docs.
It's Black Friday.
And
the
actually,
site's
like,
not
so let me-
loading.
it's actually
Hey,
more useful.
what are you gonna do
I
about
think
it?
people need help
That
with
sort of
totally
thing.
GraphQL work. And like I love having a smooth DevOps like deployment. Like that's nice.
Like,
But
once it's live,
customers don't give a shit about
it comes
how smooth
packaged.
it
It's like
is.
an in-browser testing
Yep.
tool that's always up to
Yeah,
date.
I'm gonna be like database administrators. I feel like that's a role that's kind of disappearing a little bit. Like there's still need
so,
for
for
like
example,
database specialists and stuff like that. But
when we
this
generate
is okay. This is
schema,
wild
you can see here
speculation,
on the
and
right
it doesn't
is
reflect
document
any of the views of my
selector.
employers
The documentation
Hang on, I'm
form, it
tweeting
shows
this.
you
Keep going.
Tweet
or
at CEO and shows wild speculation, posts and deletes. No, I feel like because everything's moving to the cloud now, and like
so if I want
as
to make a query,
developers, like everyone expects
it
it
automatically
easier, and I
generates
feel
from a
like
schema.
the database that's
a
going to
single
win
instapost
database,
or
like
all
the
of
next
them, and I
database
can put in-
force is going to be the one that's like easier to
put in
use and like
subqueries,
requires
I can
as
limit
little
or sort
human
those
intervention as
as
humanly
only
possible.
Totally.
Just generated
and
That's totally it.
And I feel like it's
shows you
like it's
the
data.
data
Like you can
from
run
that.
like massive
So as a
machine learning
front-end
things.
developer,
This is what
I
like, we're already doing this in
query
MongoDB.
instead
Like
of
if you're
features
running your
and
stuff
stuff.
here, like we give you like index performance analyzers and we
That's
auto
a
scale.
good
We do
question.
like
This one
you
goes
just
a little
save your
bit
data
above my
there,
head,
and we'll
but
just
can Realm take
we'll
advantage
take care of it for you.
GraphQL
We're giving like
subscriptions?
like recommendations
I don't
if
even
you
know
know
what a
actually have to do
subscription
now.
is. Let's look.
Hey, we're seeing you making
Um,
this query a lot. You don't have this index. You'd save.
It's still
You know,
pretty
your
new.
queries
I
were,
don't
like,
know.
would
I don't even really know.
have
what a
increased
subscription
performance.
is that like
70%
a
view.
just like a
It's
just
running.
like-
You know what I mean?
maybe like
Yeah,
a
like,
call-
but if
oh,
you
yeah,
do
like
that for you
real-time updates.
automatically, like I'm talking next 5-10 years, like,
Oh,
I
yeah,
would not be
it's
shocked to
confident
see if
opinion.
like we have
yes, it's
like AI cloud managed. Okay,
I
database
don't
systems
think
that
we
humans
do
don't have
actually.
to touch much.
Yeah, so it's like a.
I remember
and
I
we do a
worked with a
server
large
push, which is
education
now
provider that shall remain nameless.
That would be
and there was
super
like
nice,
this
and I
sort
don't
of
know-
defining event in the
Well, it even
database
says right there not
administrator's
to
life
use
there. We
subscriptions.
moved everything from
largely do
like real hardware
polling
over
or
to
re-execute
Amazon's
on-demand queries.
RDS service.
This application
And my
is
experiences
using
with that
polling.
team
Actually, let me
went
show- I
from,
can show that.
Hey guys, I
to-
really need this
so
backup.
here,
It's been 5
you
days.
can see
Hey guys, I
I'm
really
polling
need
like
this
every
backup. You're
half a
holding up
second. It's
25
polling
people
my
from working.
GraphQL endpoint.
To oh, you need a backup? Yeah, we'll handle it right now because
Yeah,
so
well,
much had been
You
sort
can
of
actually see.
craft work
Oh, yeah, here we
had been
go.
taken off their
So
plates,
you can
and they could
see
actually
the-
focus on what was required a human and
Yeah,
be
we can make
providing
that
the
bigger.
services.
You can see the
organization.
GraphQL query coming through
And that
every half
the
second.
ability for the machine to get involved
Response,
and automate these processes, like they weren't making batch jobs anymore. They
There's
weren't
the
having
response.
to do
Yes, you can
manual
see that
restores.
we're getting the
It
data
was just
back.
sort of push a button, and I
That's
think
requested in that
you know
form.
if you look around the room,
So, yeah,
there's
this is
not a
even
really
polling.
whole
I
lot
don't-
of
I'm not aware of
out-of-work
subscriptions yet,
DBAs.
but that's a
There's
great
still
question.
plenty of need for
So the
them. They're just doing
GraphQL
higher
query
level
structure
work.
was basically
Absolutely, yeah, exactly. That's a great way to put it. Yeah, they're like they're not manually doing these scripts, and yeah, they're like
Yeah,
it's just
exactly.
all
Yep,
being
100%.
more
Yep.
automated.
So
and I don't
we
think
can
that
look
trend
at
is going to
the-
stop anytime.
Let's hope not. And if you look at something like
This is like-
Mongo, where a fair
no
amount of
offense,
control
but the
gets in the
example
hands
that
of
you
the
see
application
pretty
developer,
straightforward.
there's
What
less
happens if
need
it
to
gets more
engage teams that have
complicated?
other
Like, could
priorities right now.
expect
Yeah,
the
I mean, you
GraphQL
can
endpoint to
own your
also
own
fetch
sort of
and implement
timelines
embedded
because you can
relationships, or would
handle
that be a second
the things
call?
you need to do for the database.
Yeah, so like you're
because,
defining the
like, say,
types. We have like
Mongo
an
allows you
supposed
to
to
do
be want
that
to
as
get
an
more
app
like
developer,
complicated
and it does a lot of
relationships. You can
stuff for you,
define
like the
those on
scaling and the
GraphQL
sharding and
endpoints.
all that stuff.
So that
Yeah,
exactly.
Right now,
Which, like
my-
this like, React
So
developers.
like, let's say I'm a front developer and
too. Like
I only
Yeah, I
have
just-
access to
when I'm like
this
I don't
data right now.
I
This
don't
is
love
GraphQL
having to
endpoint.
worry about
doesn't
infrastructure,
GraphQL. If there's
scaling
new
up,
data
deploy
you
a
get
local
that doesn't
goofy app. I
exist
don't have to
yet,
like
you
worry
would have to
about
go
scaling
talk
the
to the
database
backend
in
to
6
get
months or
that.
you know what I mean? I
Or
just like in this
wanted
case,
deploy,
you'd have to create that
I
relationship.
just want to let it.
I just want
Once
to
they
work
create
forever.
something with the fields there.
That could maybe be a
in
good transition too, because I'm
combination with those
totally in the
fields,
same
it makes
boat,
sense.
and I'm actually my
100%.
next
Yeah,
questions would
absolutely.
be
You
like,
could do,
how
like,
do you
complicated
get
stuff.
started, right, for your average
yeah,
React
you can pass
developer?
it,
So I
like,
know you wanted to show us
variables,
off
like,
the
those are, like,
app, would now be a good
arguments
time
for a
to
function.
go ahead
You
and
pass
bring
this
that
through
up
so you
and
can,
take
like,
a look?
Absolutely. Yeah, this actually would be good too. Like
And I think I can even show you.
I've been thinking a lot
this is
about
like a simple query. We just want to get all the
2021
posts in my database.
tech stack and like what I'm
Make sure
using
this
and like
information
predictions
follows
for next year.
But let's take a look at like
This app is
our-
a good example of kind of
my
a
create
typical app I'm
components.
building. It's a little bit different. I built
So
this.
this is
probably 6 months ago.
it's not super complicated. This is
Last
just
March,
creating
I
a
don't know.
brand new.
Time doesn't
It's
exist
supposed
anymore.
to.
I don't know what's
But I'm
happening.
defining a mutation.
But you can also
Yeah,
like
I feel like
you could like
for me,
I can't
I'd
help
be
but
curious
call
to get
they're
your
basically
thoughts
like
too on like
function like naming a function
next year,
right?
especially like the React
So
front end.
if you try to get more complicated, I feel like static front ends is
describing
huge,
what
like
they're doing.
Next.js type stuff or Netlify,
And then
Yep.
passing
like
data through
static
here,
React components,
arguments,
and then even like
kind of
right now like for me, easiest, scalable, cheapest option has just been a serverless
How
backend.
concerned should I be of
Like,
those?
I'm typically getting some
like,
data
is
from
it
the
called
database.
a query?
I
The
set up
syntax
serverless
you throw
endpoints, and then
in
I have-
there.
I work MongoDB, so I'm saving
Whatever
my
it's
data in
called.
MongoDB.
How concerned should I be of those getting
But I just hit that with serverless
unwieldy
endpoint.
or
It's super cheap,
like
it's scalable,
a mess? Because
and
I think
it's, like, very
so to
minimal
me
amount of work.
the nice part of
Yeah.
having REST APIs
I think, like,
is like I can put in a
almost
thing,
there's almost like a rush
get
to
my
create,
whatever
like, the
Ruby on
like,
Rails
it's a nice,
for
clean,
React,
simple thing.
right?
Yeah.
The backend
Like,
sort
people
of
like
hides that
React, but
complexity
they
and figures
want-
it out. Once you
but I
start
can
to
see,
need
like,
things
in a production
server-side
app,
rendering
having
and
such,
things that
like,
it,
I use
those
some
things aren't
tool
built
to
into React
generate,
proper, so
and
you either need to
it
roll
can
your
be
own, which is
gibberish to
not
me, just
the
actually
easiest thing in the
looking at
world,
it,
or you use something like
Next.
Curious what
And
you think in terms of
there's
how
other
well
ones too, I
that
forget
sort
the
of
names, like, I
scales
feel
up
like it's
is
the
these
hip thing
things
to do
to try
more
to
complex and advanced.
build on that sort of
Yes,
sort of
I've worked with
spectrum
more
of
scalable or like
project
more
solutions,
like larger use
whatever.
cases. You're right. This is
So,
not
because
a
Gatsby
this was a simple
is
CRUD app,
a little
right?
bit different,
Which
but
is the
also
point
kind
out.
of
which is perfect
related.
for what we're doing.
Yeah.
I'm just
Like,
wondering,
and I
like,
think it's
scaling
driven,
it.
like you said,
Yeah, no,
Netlify has
absolutely.
gotten
And like I actually, so I wouldn't
these
recommend even like
solutions for actually
right now. I'm
hosting and
just
putting these
saving
things up
the
have gotten so much
GraphQL
better
requests, like,
in the
the
last
component
year or
that's
two
in those
also,
requests, but
that
it's like
like
it's
you
more
can take these
complicated.
frameworks and
I typically
integrate them
start,
with
like,
these backends.
collating
And
all of them together.
it's quite
and create, like,
powerful what you can
abstracting
do
those
now
away.
by just
So
like
right now it's like
hitting,
my
like,
posts are kind of
essentially
responsible
file
for
new
constructing
app,
those
right?
and passing them through.
100%.
You nailed it though. Like, and again,
by
like
just
back to
trying
my
to get-
database point, like the
get a post
person
that
who's
can
gonna
call that
win the
function
React
and, like,
GraphQL kind of abstract framework
So
wars
yeah,
is going to be
I'm
the one
kinda
who
showing
does
the
it
bones on it.
easy, like makes the experience
You could
easier,
totally
better than anyone else.
make an
I think
abstraction out of it.
Netlify
Yeah,
is
that
like
actually makes perfect
getting
sense.
close
You
there.
have some sort of
Like, it should
script
just-
you can call
like
to
so
get
this app is built in Create React
kind
app,
of
which is super
refers to
easy,
the-
but it's still like the
the group of
deployment
things
piece
and
is
not
still
just
kind
kinda
of
cowboy
like I still have to
code
like build
and all
it and then
these
I have to host
weird-
statically
Because
host
that
it
could
somewhere.
get really
Yeah,
unwieldy.
But yeah,
I
and I do the
Netlify
same
just,
thing with
like,
my REST endpoints. I just like
handle
get
it all
user,
for
so
you.
get user and pass through. an
I
ID,
always
and
feel
just,
like weirdly,
like I want that to
I
work,
feel
right.
you could
Okay,
you
so
could totally
I'd be
restructure or
curious what you guys
reformat
think on this
to-
too, but like having like
it's almost like an
I like
interesting
having
shift
it'd be
because
easy, but I don't want it to be
if you're
too
building something
magical.
big, there's going to be
And I like
complexity
seeing the little-
somewhere.
the parts, but I also
you
think that can
can't
make
you
it
can't get
harder
rid
to
of it.
get.
It's inherent
Like,
to the
I think,
process. But this is almost
Meteor,
moving
I think,
some of
struggled
it
that.
from
It was a little too
let's
magical. It
remove
was,
some
like,
of the
kind a little
bit,
abstract,
the
like,
logic
but
that's
it was
going
so
on in the
easy to
back end
use.
and move them kind of into these.
I don't know. I don't know what that
queries.
balance is.
So there's like a little bit of a
Do you have any thoughts on
trade-off. Like
Yeah, I
there's
remember
going to be
Meteor.
a little
Me and
bit
a buddy of mine who's
more
probably watching right
syntax
now
that
went to
might
a
be
Meteor
a little
meetup,
bit
and
to
I learned
understand,
some
but
Mongo and whatnot.
at the same
It was
time, you're
pretty
getting
cool because the
benefits in
client
terms
side
of you're
and
able to
the
move
database were all linked
faster.
up, and you can
You're
do like really
you're more
rapid
able to.
development
Honestly,
with it. But the problem was it's
one of the big benefits to me seems like you can put more of the
control to
load on the
front end.
the
And
front
so
end
while we're sitting
team
there, and
to
apologies
do
if the
more
guy
and
who
less
did
of a
the
need for
presentation was
back end
listening, but he
people
wasn't very good at
to
what he did. It
make
kept
a lot
doing
of
the
this
same
happen
points over and
because
over
you're
again.
moving more
Yeah,
of the stack to
boring.
the front end.
So I started hacking
too.
around,
Yeah,
or
or
even like the application
more
more
delicate
changing
for the back-end
his
developers,
demo apps,
thousands
some
who are listening
completely
right now to our
ridiculous
live
stuff.
show.
Figuring they'd
You're
switch
really
back
not
to it and
asking
I'd get a
them to
big
sit in
laugh.
all these crazy
2 hours
meetings
later,
and
they'd
build
never switch
custom
back to the
endpoints all
screen.
the
So
time.
as he and I were
Asking
walking
them
out
to
of the
build
room,
plumbing
we'd
and
gotten around the
available
corner. All of a sudden, the
help
room
something
like
else.
busts
So
out
it almost
with
frees them
laughter.
up to do
And I think
more
that highlights the issue
important
that
tasks.
if you
than,
start doing magic stuff, someone has
being
to
part of the
support
development
this.
team.
Can
Yeah.
you imagine
Another
rolling out
API
some important
piece or call
application
or
with
something.
Meteor and being naive
The
about it?
ability
And
to
next
kind
thing
of
you know, someone's
desynchronize
just
the development
changing your
and
data for you from
dependency
the
on your
client
backend
side with
team.
no
Seems like
controls.
it would really
100%. Yeah,
speed up the
totally.
timeline,
Yep.
assuming you
I think
The
the hard
appropriate
part.
amount
I
of
guess the
magic is
part that I'm
good, but
still
at the
kind
same
of
time,
confused
that
about is, let's just
345
say
call
for
is
a
going to
minute
come, and you need to know
that
what to
in
do.
I know you have a
It's
great answer.
too abstracted away.
I think once
So
you get
I've
servers and
all my
databases
queries straight
involved,
through this
those
one
like any sort of magic
GraphQL
becomes the
and it
stakes
turns
get
out that in
higher.
my application
Because
there's
if I
5
use it in like a
roles,
little JavaScript
one
framework
which is
and I
highly
want to rip it
restricted,
out,
one which is highly
chances are like I mean if you're using a
Where
framework
is
for your
the
whole
sort
app,
of
that's one thing.
allowed
But if you're just
data
using some like little
role
utility,
segmenting thing?
swapping that out is
Where's
easy.
that complexity?
It's different when then like
No, that's a great
Meteor,
question.
if you
So there's-
decide
there's
that's
two
not
ways
working
you can
out for
handle
you,
this.
well,
I'll tell
crap,
you,
your
like-
entire
no,
app is
let's do- let's
coupled to
do-
that. There
Let's
are
do the
no
general,
like
let's assume,
pieces you can
actually, I'm gonna show you the
extract
MongoDB way
out of
first, and then
that.
we'll show you the.
So,
if you're rolling
and,
your own,
like even with
MongoDB
Next,
way.
it's like
Yeah,
it's
so
almost like
of
finding
course,
a
right, like,
balance because at
I
one
want-
end it's
maybe
still you're still
we're
building a
making our
React
Instagram
app,
posts,
so
and I only want you to see your
you
own
still have
posts, and I
that.
don't want-
And if you
can't see
decided to
anyone
move
else's
away from
posts,
Next,
that,
well,
right? Like,
you
that's-
could reconcile
data
some
security is
of
super
that,
important,
I
or you need to be
suppose.
authenticated.
But
so you can
it's
rip
about
those
finding
components
that
out.
mix.
It's open to
Yeah.
the world. Yeah, exactly.
finding that mix, finding what you're
but
comfortable with.
Most
Depends on how
applications
much risk
aren't
you're willing to
that
take on
specific
for
data.
whatever it is you
So
happen
the
to be
nice
building.
part too
'cause
is
the equation's totally different if you're
MongoDB, the way
building
to
like
do
a
that
little
is kind of
side
like
project or like a
defining
personal
rules
thing
for
that's
your
not a big
application.
deal, or you're
So
building
you can
something
find,
that
like,
you intend to be
who can see
around
what
for
kind of
5,
data.
10
So let
years
me
for some
see
major
here.
company. It sort of changes the equation
Authentication.
too.
Yeah, so you can like
allow users to be
I'm just
authenticated,
thinking out loud right
define
now,
different
but I feel like the
roles
balance
and
is like,
rules for your
I want
application.
same
Like right now,
defaults that
anyone can
run
read
right
and
and
it'll
work
work
in
in
here.
here.
But if I like
maybe
configure a
I
file
can
for 5 hours,
only
like a webpack
only
file,
if you
it's just like a
are
pain in the ass to get
the user ID matches
Yep.
the owner ID, then you can actually make a.
But yeah, I still want to have that option to
Maybe
maybe everyone
change
can
it.
read it, but
I don't know.
your user ID gets matched.
ESLint, I think, is
Oh,
So
interesting.
doing pretty great with that. Like you can, so with MongoDB, the way to
Install
do
it
that
and
is
it
starts
roles
linting
of
who
who
can
gets
access, and then if you want to
data.
start like getting super custom with it, like I feel
But
like
if you're
I
rolling
want
your
that
own,
kind
so
of
take a look at
experience.
my
I don't
example
know.
where I rolled my own.
What's the experience like for
you
Mongo
would-
in
you
here?
would have
Like
the
what?
graph-
So
the
if
first
I'm
thing
React
you need
developer,
is
right? I
Graphql
just
endpoint.
hello worlded my
You have to
React
put
app
that
and I want to use
authentication logic
Mongo.
in
Like what's
here.
the
So right
very
now, if you
first thing I
query
do?
this yeah, that's a great question.
You'd have to
Let's
put a
see
check
here.
in here first.
Blah
to
blah
see are they
blah.
authenticated or
Let's
not.
go through the.
Let me
before
show
we
you
actually
what this
go and
app
make that
does first of all, and then we
request.
can jump through.
So just
Logged
connect
in,
to
do they have the
preview.
right session
Sounds good.
ID? Do they have the right elevated privileges to get this data or whatever? I'm using. So I just got this set up this
So
morning.
back
It's,
along with what we said with kind of enforcing the
what
schema
file am
in
I
the
in?
application layer.
Hang on a sec,
also
let me,
enforcing the
I'm,
data security
so I'm using.
controls
This is the first time I've used.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm on
Yeah.
Windows, and I'm
And a
using
lot of
the
people- so, like,
Windows
This thing, I'm defining how to get this
Yeah,
data. Like
installed and use
most
it.
of
It's
like when I
pretty
so I
awesome-ish.
implemented bringing GraphQL
Yeah,
to
it's
it was a
like-
RESTful service.
it's
What
not
we
as
did
integrated
was
as, like,
we
a
just
Mac
like
environment, which is
hooked up all the REST
endpoints
endpoints, like
already
it
existed
existed
in here,
and we just
passed through the data to like environments, but it's still
so, like,
there's
we
still
kind
some
of
magic.
got that
about
request
it. That's what's
correctly
happening.
here,
And
and with the sub
sometimes you
servers
can't
kind
get
of
there
manage
from
their
here,
own
but-
authentication or whatever. So the
Let's see
teams
here,
that
let
manage
me
that kind of
get
still
a
have
go.
nothing changed
This,
from their perspective.
but it's been
But
pretty smooth.
We're just
but
hooking
it's
up
like
the
running
request
like a
endpoints.
VM or something on Windows. It's
So,
just
yeah,
like
you can
there's
do you can
something
put
always
that wherever
gets
you
weird
want,
with it.
if
It's
you're
not
managing
super
your
smooth
users.
yet, but it works.
wherever you're
Okay, so
making
let
sure
me
someone's
jump in
safe
here.
on
Let me
application.
start my thing, and then I'll show you.
So we're coming up here towards the top of the hour. I want to give chat here an opportunity.
speaking
If
of
you
things
have any
just working
questions
in
that you
Magic,
have
I'll-
that you
while that's
haven't
coming
gotten
up, I'll
in,
point out, I
make
don't
sure
know if you saw
to
me messing
get
with
those
the
in
camera
here in
earlier, but
the
right
last
as
few minutes.
TJ
And
turned the
Joe, is there
video off,
anything
I
we
was
haven't
making my
covered or
desk
we haven't
go
went through that you
stand
want to
mode
be
and
sure to
stopped about
mention?
halfway through
Any other
at
like
the most
Mongo
awkward
services
point
that are
for my
going
back,
to
and so
change
I'm
our
trying to
lives or
stay in
change our
frame
apps
and
that
try to
we haven't
fix it.
Squatting.
that we haven't went over
Make
so
it through an
far?
hour
Yeah,
without
I
needing
think-
a
I mean, it's-
chiropractor. I think we're
What's
good
this app
now.
on here?
I think this is a good place.
Oh,
If
that's
anyone's
too
curious
good.
about getting started with GraphQL,
Okay, cool. So
like I said, I
this
think this
is
is a good
a
application to get started on.
React application.
Hit me
Yep.
up on
Free
my
React
Twitter
app,
for sure
and it's
try to do
using
that.
it's like an
I
and
call it
let's see
Insta
here.
Post. It's an Instagram clone, basically.
I think about like
so
new
I'll
stuff
show
you
you
have
how it
out.
works. It's nothing fancy. It can do just basic CRUD operations for some posts.
No,
I don't think so.
So I'm gonna have
I
image
have a
URL. This is
question.
a
To someone who's trying to
home-
figure out what to do for their next
home alone, and it's hitting a
what
GraphQL
would you advise
endpoint, a
them,
GraphQL
like,
serverless
when
endpoint,
MongoDB is the best of it?
and it's
What is
yeah,
really
all
the best?
all the data's being
Yeah,
posted.
I think there's a lot of
You can
different
see here,
like great
upload new
use cases
posts. I
for
can click on it,
and it
I can.
depends.
Looks like someone deleted some.
I use
stuff
it-
here, so I'm just gonna clean up these old posts.
Especially like I just use it if I just need.
yeah.
So pretty simple. It's just like
just
basic CRUD app, right? Using a
the hello world of
brain. You don't have to use
make
around.
it's less
But,
code,
yeah,
let's go
abstraction.
through some
I'm
stuff
already
here.
just using it.
But it works really well for like analytics.
I also
I do
do
want to
Git
show
projects.
this
I
to.
focus
So
on
I'm
LED
hosting
too.
all this on
MongoDB
MongoDB
Atlas. It's our
backend.
cloud hosted option.
We have a always free
Yeah, I
share basic.
remember writing a lot
And
on
this is
business
my.
logic
I'm just.
that
This is a
would
free little
translate
demo on
structure
here, or
of a
free.
relational database into what was
Free database,
and the
which is
ability to
awesome.
do
Free
that
forever.
in document
But let's take a look at it.
seems like
I have one collection. It
cuts
just has the
out a
posts,
whole
and it's
class
saving
of code
metadata
that
for
just
those
doesn't have
posts.
to be written
I do want to show you.
Actually, this is
GraphQL
true of
setup, though, really
GraphQL and
fast,
SQL
right?
databases,
Go
but
through
like
these
so
collections.
GraphQL and ORMs are like an
Yeah, I just have
abstraction
Insta
layer,
posts,
and, like,
the posts, and then
they can be really helpful.
Hopefully, once these load
You
up,
whenever you have any
the
abstraction
Home
in
Alone
your code
document,
base,
just-
it
we just
adds an initial sort
throw
of
in
code,
there.
and it's more code for your project.
there it is.
It's like your data is
So,
running through
save
more
that
lines
into our
of code, there's
database.
more things that could
Great.
go wrong.
I'll make this a little bit bigger.
I always try to do like the
Oh my
minimum amount of
gosh.
code that's going to
That's
easiest
too
to
big.
maintain long.
Yeah, true story. That
Cool,
same
let's see
education
here.
provider.
I just wanna show you this too. You can do, like, remember I was talking about, like,
between 10 and 4 p.m.
having
Not that that's an important time or not.
computers like
It turns out the root
like help
cause
you
of
make
this
better
was some
decisions. Like
developer
we
was
tell you
using
anti-patterns now, and we have a performance advisor built in, so like we'll give you index suggestions in
enough requests, it could crash the application server.
Cool.
But
That's
I
good.
had no idea this was going on.
Also, so the
Magic.
serverless option is a ton of those. TJ and I
You
talked about
absolutely
those
nailed it.
last
Like,
time on
I
the
think that, like,
podcast. It worked like an
I
ORM is
wasn't
great for
actually
most
at the
applications, but like if
podcast,
you're
so
trying
in
to
terms
scale,
of
an ORM
the
is doing a lot of magic,
architecture
and you
setup,
don't
you
lose
have a
control of your
React app that's
database
running
structure
locally
and like how
that's
things get
hitting
split
this
up,
GraphQL
indexes and queries.
this GraphQL endpoint
And you're right, like
set
some
up
weird
through
shit that you have
Mongo
because you don't
tier
know, you don't
somehow,
see it
is that
anymore.
right?
Yes,
I don't know.
absolutely. Yep.
I
So
prefer, like, the least. I'm gonna say this too.
show
With GraphQL, like
now.
GraphQL is
So,
probably not great for one project.
well,
Like,
yeah,
it's just
well, I'm gonna show the
me
code
myself
real
maybe
fast,
one
but,
person.
yeah, so
the rest
I have
is
a-
honestly probably easier because it's like
MongoDB now.
It's
You
another
can
thing I have to
actually
maintain and work on.
hit this button,
GraphQL
generate
really
a GraphQL
shines
schema,
at massive scale with a ton of
and
different
it will
backend
just
teams,
make
like
a GraphQL endpoint
a
for
lot of
you
different front-end
based on your
developers.
data.
That's
A lot
we
of
know the
changes
data
happen.
types
That's
for
where
like
your documents.
that's where you're going to be
So
getting
we
a
can
lot
make
of
a
benefit out of it. But
all the code
We have
operate
a
abstraction,
GraphQL show
data,
coming up in
and
January.
you can put rules on it or
To
whatever,
see that.
which is what I did here.
Oh,
As
yeah.
you can see, I have like
Totally.
a query
Me too.
defined.
Yeah,
MongoDB
it's,
already does this for
yeah.
you. You can
Joe,
see
this has
those
been
real
great.
time
I
here.
haven't seen.
So that's
no
what
other
I'm doing. It's a
questions in chat
serverless
other
endpoint
than
that sits
what
on
we've
top of
already
my
covered
MongoDB
and asked
database in the
so
cloud,
far.
and then I have
I
a
know we like to end
GraphQL
with
layer
just
that kind of
any plugs,
that allows me to
anything
interact
you
with
want to
that
do, or
serverless
any
endpoint.
things you want to mention,
that's all in
like
there. So you can
Twitter
do this with
handle
anything,
if people
but
want to follow
obviously I
you,
work for MongoDB,
MongoDB Resources. Why don't you give us like a
Okay,
dump
And so as
of
cool.
a React
things you want
developer,
to
all I have
plug,
to do is
things you
set
want
up an
people to
account
buy,
here and
all that sort of
integrate.
I don't think people buy. If anyone wants to follow me,
let
my
me
username,
send you
my Twitter username.
Let me send you the code for this.
I make a lot of
TJ. I'll have you save
TikTok
it.
videos.
The README for this goes through all of the how-to for this.
Yeah, you just set up an account.
It's
Not
free
many
forever.
software developers. On there,
If
but there
I
are.
would recommend to like,
there's a couple.
the way I
Um,
learn how to do new things is like I'll set
I'm
up
gonna
a
send
starting
TJ these
place,
links
like,
too.
I'll have code
We just launched
to, like,
developer
and I get the whole
MongoDB.com
working for that I know works, and then I'll start changing that
to
to fit the requirements of whatever project I'm trying to build. It's kind of how I would set up something.
I want something. I want to
articles,
know
whatever.
whatever. Also, if you have questions
It's a good
about
place to start
MongoDB,
it,
or if you're trying
Want
to
to do
get
React, serverless,
the GraphQL endpoint set up, you're getting stuck, go to community.mongodb.com.
Should we talk about
That's
like
really
what
good.
is GraphQL really fast too for people who
may not know from the
front-end
That's
community?
it.
Yeah,
That's
go
it.
for it. And I made sure to put those
I'm curious,
links over
TJ
in
or
the
Dan,
chat.
have you
So
guys
if you're
used
watching this
GraphQL
live, you
before?
can check
It's okay
those
if you
out
haven't. Just
there. And
I've done
if you're watching
the-
this on YouTube later,
Once
we'll get
again,
those
like
in
the
description,
basics,
so you should be able to
sure,
scroll
the
down.
hello
Sort of
world
take
thing.
around.
Find
There's
those
like
there.
the GraphQL
Dan,
like
you got-
playground that I've a plug to give. Toyed around with a
I
little
have a
bit.
plug for the
Honestly, like
sweet
it's
sweater.
to me, it's a little bit overwhelming.
Oh,
Like,
wow.
'cause I've been doing
like I said, the Enterprise
things with
React
just
newsletter is
straight up
something all our
REST for
developers
50
submit
years
articles
now
for,
at this
so
point, right?
They
So
think it's cool.
I'm a little
I
bit
probably will
like
too.
old man,
So
like
check
don't
out the
touch
link
with
in the
my
back,
tech
we
that
never
I
spam or
like.
sell your email address.
I understand so
You've
well.
got the
I've
SEO
got
covered
it.
too,
because
Yep.
I search enterprise
No, I
React
love that.
newsletter for finding it
Let's see
here.
here. I actually
Come
have
up number
a,
one, so you nailed that.
I have a deck.
Yes,
I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but
I've
do you
earned
want
my
to just
sweater.
start?
That's right.
And I'll just go ahead and toss
This
the
actually is a
React
good one to
Wednesday
start
site
on.
in here. So
Start from
if you enjoyed this
slide.
chat at all,
Okay.
we do this every Wednesday.
Cool.
1
So
o'clock.
yeah, I
We
think
hang out,
TJ,
we
I
hang
think you
out,
bring up a
we bring
good
in
point.
cool
That's
people
kind of
like
a
Joe to
common
talk
experience.
about
I think that
tech
it's kind
they
of
know
overwhelming when you first start
really
with it.
well. So
But
next week,
walk with
actually,
me
we'll
here. I
do
want-
like
I think it helps
some sort of like
illustrate
holiday
where
edition. It's just going to be
GraphQL
Dan and me.
excels
We're just
by,
going
like,
to hack on
walking
something.
through,
We're not totally sure exactly what we're doing
where-
quite yet.
No.
And then in the
Thank
new
you.
year, we got some
Every
pretty good
time I open
shows
PowerPoint,
lined
it
up.
does
We've
this. I don't
got
know
Jamie
why.
Birch to talk about
But
React
where
native
REST
script.
APIs
It's gonna
kind
be some fun.
don't
We've
work
got
really
Eve
well.
Porcello
So,
to talk about GraphQL. So
Everyone
that'll be
listening in
on
the chat,
January
everyone
13th.
here, like imagine
We're
the
talking
situation.
with
So let's
Tyler
imagine
Miss. We're going to
you're on
have
a
him
front-end
on
development
sometime in
team and
January.
you're showing
We're just
recent
setting a date up
orders from a
for that as
user.
well.
And
So
so you have a
some fun
backend
times.
developer
If you're
who has an
interested, check
endpoint
out the
that
site.
gives
There's ways
you
you can get these things on
the
your
recent
calendar and
orders,
such.
and it
So
returns
make
an
sure to check
array
that out.
of like order IDs.
But all right. Thanks one more
So we're
time,
just
Joe.
putting order
This is
IDs
great.
on the page.
Definitely
Thanks for
learned
having
more
me.
about Mongo.
But hold up.
Get some
Your
fun.
project manager.
Oh,
says
this is
you
a friend
developer.
I hope I can come back.
We have actually
Yeah,
changed
that's
our
what I'm trying to
requirements.
say.
I want you to show
Excellent.
like a
Good having you.
hydrated list of users
All right.
of
Until
orders.
next time, everybody.
So it's not just the
Have a
order
good one.
numbers because users don't care
Adios.
about that. We want to see like order date and the order, all the products that were ordered in there and the price and invoice and whatever. Okay, so as a front end developer, like we have to go work with our back end developers and ask what's the best way to update our API. So this is the part where like we start talking about like there's no consistent way to do it, right? Like you can make a new endpoint called hydrated recent orders or hydrate SKUs, or maybe you put a query parameter on the end that says hydrated equals true, or maybe you put that query parameter in the headers, hide that, and then make the request that way. But the point is there's no consistent way to do that, and making changes is really challenging for REST APIs. Also too, like, and this is a real world example, like I got this, I had to do this once with the order IDs, and then what I would have to do is make multiple round trips to get the order IDs, then make another request back to the server to hydrate those, receive those back, and then I display that. So it's making 2 round trips between the client and the server to display all that.
Sounds a bit clunky.
Yeah, and I think we all have experienced that too. Like maybe you have to go and get a bunch of data from a bunch of different endpoints, and you may have to maybe hit it a couple times, but the user's waiting the entire time for that, right? So GraphQL works a little bit differently. It's a single REST endpoint, and you just tell it all the data you want to get from that single endpoint, and it goes and gets it, and then it brings it back to you. You don't have to care about where it is. It's a consistent way to ask those. If you have changes, you can do those in real time. And you don't have to hit multiple endpoints. You just hit a single endpoint to get all that data, which is kind of nice. And it's REST. It's just like a defined way to do that.
All the requests get bottlenecked through one endpoint, and then what is it that distinguishes the request? The request signature?
Yeah, so that's like the GraphQL. So GraphQL isn't actually tech; it's a specification. So it says like it tells you how this single REST API should behave. Like how do you write a GraphQL endpoint? So GraphQL endpoint here is the same as it is here. It just is there. So let's take a look at it. Like a request looks like this, right? I want to get all of the hero data from the Star Wars, the Swappy API. As a front-end developer, I don't care where it is or who maintains that server. I just say like, I want this information and I want this metadata. And I get nothing more, nothing less. And if I want to make changes to that, I don't have to go to the backend team and like ask them to make changes. I can just change my requests and get the data I need. Which is pretty
So
sick.
instead of the API being a contract of what you get for what you give, this is more of, ask and you shall receive.
Exactly. It's declarative. It's like SQL, right? Like I don't care where and how, just give me the thing.
And since GraphQL, it's just a specification, right? So presumably then on the Mongo end, you all had to write something that acts as like the server that parses this syntax that comes in, actually goes out to the database, gets it, puts it in the correct format and backs it up.
Yep.
And like any other database provider would have to do the same with their own text stack underneath. But it's just a consistent like translation layer almost, right? Like for passing
100%.
back and forth. Okay.
Yep. And I want to clear too, like GraphQL, like you can use multiple, like I think it really shines when using lots of different databases too. Like you can hit a SQL database and a cloud database on AWS, another one on Azure or whatever, or MongoDB, right? Like you could, but even though they're all coming from different APIs, different databases, it's still being presented the same way.
And
Which I want to, as like,
you'd still need someone to wire that up, right?
Yes,
like,
absolutely. Yep. So like this layer, because like typically what's happening is like backend development teams are like developing APIs and they're only here. Or is my mouse? My mouse is like,
yeah, we see your mouse.
There we go. Yeah, so it's like the green boxes there. So like they're making the APIs, they're making the Swagger documentation for like how to interact with their APIs directly. And actually, in my experience, backend developers hate it's a little extra work because they need to hook it into GraphQL. So they're usually pretty anti GraphQL. It tends to be front-end developers who are benefiting the most from a GraphQL endpoint, and a lot of times that's be front-end development teams who are driving that adoption and like getting leadership to get into it because you're right, it's another layer of abstraction that the backend teams have to hook into. But
yeah, I could see it could help you move faster because I've definitely been in those situations before where you get to the point where like so you have to go through whole processes where you sync with the backend team. It's like, okay, well, let's design this API, right?
Yes.
And then you get halfway into the project and you realize, okay, this needs to change. And then you go back and forth and it can hold you up in some cases pretty considerably.
Yeah, that
100%.
multiple parties of work thing. But then again, I suppose, one way to think about this is once you have the data hooked up to GraphQL, the backend team's basically done. And what I find is most common, but let me know if you see something different, is there's always more front-end apps using the same data than it is the other way around. Like you almost never have one app that starts consuming bunches of data points. It's always like there's a set number of data points and then there's n number of applications that keep growing that feed off of those data points. So if you had everything up in GraphQL, it would seemingly free up the backend team from having to write endless APIs or tweak their APIs.
100%. Yeah, it's like it's a work up front, but it saves massive time back and like later on for the teams. I want to show you like you don't have to do this with MongoDB. We do this all for you, but this is an app where I wrote my own node server and implemented my own GraphQL node server. So like I'm defining that you define the types of what you can get from that database. But like you want to say if someone requests to delete a to-do item, see, I'll make this a little bit bigger here.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, could you blow it up a bit? That's good.
There we go.
It's like TJ's catchphrase, that and misspelling.
Yeah.
No, it's for streaming. I totally get it. But you're saying like if someone tries to do this to like delete a to-do item, you resolve it by doing this thing. And I'm saying like I'm going to my Mongo database collection and I'm deleting one thing using the ID that's being passed through from that request. again, MongoDB, we handle all this for you, but if you're making your own server, like you're defining how to actually do these things when you define that GraphQL endpoint.
So I had a question come in from Christian. Any thoughts on whether REST versus GraphQL is better for change management on long-lived evolving apps?
Yes, I have thoughts on this. In my experience, I led the conversion at this large e-commerce company of like how converting over to GraphQL. It was massively beneficial for our like long-term, because the apps change, right? But if like a front-end developer has the ability to change in real time the structure of the requests, like if I need new data, I just add that to my request and I don't have to go and change anything. You know what I mean? It's easier to change with GraphQL than it is with REST. Yeah, it just makes it so much more. Yeah, there's a lot of the benefits we're not getting into today, but it's front-end developers you will see massive benefit from it.
Well, and presumably, so we were looking at the Mongo backend, and there's a way to get GraphQL. Presumably, you have some other way of like generating just traditional REST requests as well for people that are more interested in that.
100%. Yeah. So like we call it Realm, which is awesome. It's our like serverless. Like no one knows about it, but it's let's see here. Like yeah, so you could do like typical like AWS Lambda functions. You can write your own serverless functions. And integrate with other services, or you just do a traditional REST API. Absolutely. So like hit this endpoints, get users /10 or something to get whatever, however you want to define that. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah, you can totally do that too.
So then
working on the GraphQL.
So then back to the post app, where does all this come in there?
Yes, good question. So let's look at like how to actually integrate GraphQL with with React anyways. Yeah, okay, cool. Let's open this code up here. What's a good place to start? Okay, so you'll see here, this is my like app entry point for the React application. I'm wrapping it in the Stitch Auth provider. That's like our serverless provider. It's been renamed to Realm. It's a recent rename, but so we're basically like wrapping it so our entire application has access to that serverless endpoint. Let's take a look at that actual Auth authentication part. Stitch Auth. Here we go. Okay. Cool. So we're just doing an anonymous login. So like, just think we have to it creates a token, but anyone can use it, which is why like anyone can get into it. Okay, but I do want, where is the passing through the, been a while since I've been in here. I'm trying to find the, here we go. So this is the part that we care about. So remember, GraphQL is a single API endpoint. We just have a single place. And what we're doing is we're instantiating that is we're creating a client. We're using Apollo, which is actually from the Meteor team, which we were talking about earlier. But you just pass it that single endpoint, which MongoDB, we give that to you. It's like, here's your serverless GraphQL endpoint. You just got to paste this in. But we're saying like, we want to just connect to this endpoint. So we're going to be sending all of our GraphQL requests to that thing. And since we've wrapped that around our entire application, all of our subcomponents will have access to be able to like make changes to that. We'll check out that in just a second here. But I just, TLDR here, we're telling your application, this is where the endpoint is, the single GraphQL endpoint. And we're going to just route all of our GraphQL requests to this point. Cool. We're also using something called Apollo. And Apollo is a, let me actually, I have a little diagram here that actually might be helpful. Here we go. Okay, so Apollo actually wraps it's front-end framework agnostic, but it makes working with GraphQL APIs much easier. So it kind of like makes our front-end components talk much more easily and receive those updates easily. So let me show you what that looks like in practice here. I want to go to a.
And you said that was by the Meteor team?
Yes, yeah. So like from the ashes of Meteor.
Really?
They birthed the Apollo project. Yep.
I guess it makes sense with the
smart folks.
I suppose with the name, like I didn't even connect the dots there, but yeah, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, they pivoted to it because I think they were like trying to figure that out because they were like they were the glue between like MongoDB database of Meteor and the front end components. And by the end of Meteor's lifecycle, you could put any framework you wanted on the front end, including React or Angular. So I think that similar. I don't know the intimate details of that, but I do know that this project kind of was their next go.
And is Apollo free to use, or
Yes.
like okay?
Yes. Yep. Yes, it is. Yep. Yep. I've tried doing this app without Apollo. If you're new to GraphQL, I just recommend using Apollo. It just makes, and I'll show you why. You don't have to worry about like structuring any of your requests or like anything, because Apollo knows where endpoint is now when we instantiated it. So let's look at like, here we go. Okay, so this is the cool part about it. Actually, I want to just go to the list page. We'll just start with a regular query. So Apollo comes prepackaged with React hooks. So we're just saying like, hey, we want to make a query. So we're just pulling from Apollo, and it's going to make us making queries really easy for us. And then here I'm using a package called GraphQL tag, and it allows us to like just structure a GraphQL query as a string literal. Cool. And Apollo takes care of all the rest. So I'm just saying like, this is the query, and we're going to pass this through to the use query hook here. So I'm actually going to show you what that looks like, right? So we have this, we're just going to pass through that query we defined here to the use query Apollo React hook. And then that returns 3 states: loading, error, and data. And we can render React components depending on the state that those Apollo hook gives back to us. So you can see here, I have a loading state. If something errors out, I just show an error. And then if all goes well, I just display the data and pass that through as props to the list page components, which is pretty easy. So you just like, you don't have to know any of the magic. It just says like, go here, send this query here, and Apollo takes care of all the state management for you.
Can you go up to that find all Insta posts?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So that's the thing, like that the MongoDB backend will help you generate, right?
Yes.
Like presumably you didn't handwrite that.
No, I didn't. Let me show you that. So you talked about you've used the GraphQL hub a little bit, or like for playing around with it. So I want to show that. So what TJ was talking about is one of the cool parts about GraphQL is you no longer need documentation, because GraphQL comes packaged with this thing called Graphql.
Very bold statement.
Yeah, I don't think they'd put that on their like website tagline.
Like you don't need Swagger docs. And actually, like, so it's actually more useful than you think. Like, I think people need help like getting GraphQL working. Of course, you need documentation for just like getting it up and running. But like once it's live, it comes packaged. It's like an in-browser testing tool that's always up to date. So you're making an update to your GraphQL endpoint, it's instantly reflected on the graphical endpoint. So for example, when we generate the schema, you can see here on the right, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. The documentation explorer, it shows you in GraphQL, you can make either a query or a mutation. And a mutation includes like puts, posts, and deletes. And query is just a get, like a REST get, right? But so if I want to make a query, it automatically generates from my schema. I can get a single Instapost or all of them, and I can put in subqueries. I can limit or sort those. All in those are just generated automatically. And if I click in there, it shows you like the data you can get from that in real time. So as a front-end developer, this is what I am able to query, and this is the data I can get from each of these different types.
Christian has another good question. This one goes a little bit above my head, but can Realm take advantage of GraphQL subscriptions?
I don't even know what a subscription is. Let's look. It's still pretty new. I don't know. I don't even really know what a subscription is. Oh, is that like a just like a
It'd be like a call. Oh yeah, like real-time updates.
queries subscriptions enable you to fetch
Oh,
data.
if you have a socket, it'll ping you if you have.
Yes, it's like a TCP connection. Okay. I don't think we do actually. Yeah, so it's like so you can do a server push if there's an update on it. That would be super nice. And I don't know.
Well, it even says right there not to use subscriptions. You should largely do long polling or re-execute on-demand queries.
This application is using polling. Actually, I can show that here too. So here, you can see I'm polling like every half a second. It's polling my GraphQL endpoint. So let's look at this request. So you can actually see. Oh yeah, here we go. So you can see make this bigger. Yay, we can make that bigger. You can see the GraphQL query coming through every half a second. And the response. Where's There's the response. Yeah, so you can see that we're getting the data back as requested in that form. So yeah, this is using polling. I'm not aware of subscriptions yet, but that's a great question.
So the GraphQL query structure was basically pick the collection, pick the data elements you want, and send it back.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, 100%. Yep. So we can actually look at the.
And
this is like,
of course, no offense, but the example that you sent is pretty straightforward. What happens if it gets more complicated? Like, would you expect the GraphQL endpoint to also fetch any kind of embedded relationships, or would that be a second call?
yeah, so like you're defining the type. So we have like an insta post, but if you want to get more like complicated relationships, you can define those on the GraphQL endpoint. So that like right now, so like let's say I'm a front developer and I only have access to this data right now, this GraphQL endpoint. So it doesn't, GraphQL, if there's new data you need to get that doesn't exist yet, like you would have to go talk to the backend teams and get that created. Or in this case, you'd have to create that relationship.
But once they create something with the fields there, then you can get any combination of those fields as long as it makes sense.
100%. Yep, absolutely. You can do like complicated stuff. Yeah, you can pass through like variables, like those are like arguments for a function. You could pass those through, so you could like start even getting more complicated with those. And I think I can even show you. So this is like a simple query. We just want to get all the insta posts in my database. That's all this is doing, and I want to retrieve this information for all of them. But let's take a look at like our. I think my create components. Create. So this is it's not super complicated. This is just creating a brand new insta post. But I'm defining a mutation. You can also you could do, I can't remember what they call them, but they're basically like function, like naming a function, right? So if you try to get more complicated, you can like start describing what they're doing with a function name. And then we're passing data through here, like an argument, and then we're saving what kind of data we want to get back from that mutation.
How concerned should I be of those? Is it called a query? The syntax you throw in there, whatever it's called. How concerned should I be of those getting unwieldy or like a mess? Because I think, so to me, the nice part of having REST APIs is like I can put in a thing that's like get my whatever,
right?
And like that's a nice, clean, simple thing. The backend sort of hides that complexity and figures it out. But I could see like in a production app having these things that like I use some tool to generate, and it could be gibberish to me just actually looking at it.
Totally.
I'm curious what you think in terms of how well that sort of scales up as these things get more complex and advanced.
Yes, I've worked with more scalable or like more like larger use cases, because you're right. This was a simple CRUD app, right? Which is the point of the app.
Which is perfect for what we're doing. I'm just wondering, like
scaling it. Yeah, no, absolutely. And like so I wouldn't recommend even like right now. I'm just saving the GraphQL requests like in the component that's making those requests. But as it gets more complicated, I typically start like collating all of them together, and I agree like abstracting those away. Because right now it's like my posts are kind of responsible for constructing those and passing that through. But if you have you could have a centralized library. Like if I just need to get a post, I can just call that function and it, like GraphQL kind of abstract away. So yeah, I'm kind of showing the bones on it, and you could totally make an abstraction library.
Yeah, that actually makes perfect sense. You'd have some sort of service you can call and get what you need. That way everyone's kind of referring to the group of things and not just kind of cowboy coding all these weird.
Totally.
Because that could get really unwieldy.
And I do the same thing with my REST endpoints. I just like get users or get user and pass through an ID, and I want that to work, right? You could totally restructure or reformat this to make that work that way.
It's almost like an interesting shift, because if you're building something big, there's going to be complexity somewhere. Like you can't get rid of it. It's inherent to the process. But this is almost moving some of it from, let's remove some of the logic that's going on in the back end and move them kind of into these queries. So there's like a little bit of a trade-off. Like there's going to be a little bit more syntax that might be a little bit to understand, but at the same time, you're getting benefits in terms of you're able to move faster. You're more able to, honestly, one of the big benefits to me seems like you can put more of the load on the front end team to do more, and less of a need for back end people to make a lot of this happen, because you're moving more of the stack to the front end too.
Yeah, or even like said, slightly more delicate for the back end developers. thousands who are listening right now to our live show, you're really not asking them to sit in all these crazy meetings and build custom endpoints all the time. You're really asking them to build the plumbing and make it available and then go on to something else. So it almost frees them up to do more important tasks than, be part of the development team who needs yet another API piece or call or something. The ability to kind of desynchronize the development and remove the dependency on the backend team seems like it would really speed up the timelines, assuming you can manage everything well. I guess the part that I'm still kind of confused about is, let's just say for a minute that, and I know you have a great answer for this. So I piped, all my queries straight through this one GraphQL thing. And then it turns out that in my application, there's 5 roles. One which is highly restrictive and one which is highly permissive. And so where is the sort of allowed data roles segmenty thing? Like, where's that complexity live?
No, that's a great question. So there's 2 ways you can handle this. I'll tell you, let's see here. Let's do the general, let's assume, actually, I'm going to show you the MongoDB way first, and then we'll show you if you're rolling your own, not MongoDB way. So of course, right? I don't want, maybe we're making our Instagram posts and I only want you to see your own posts and you can't see anyone else's posts on this app, right? That's data security is super important, or you need to be authenticated to reach it. Right now, anyone can query this data. It's open to the world. Cool. But most applications aren't that permissive with all their data. So the nice part too is, especially if MongoDB, the way to do that is through defining roles for your application. So you can define who can see what kind of data. So let me see here, authentication. So you can allow users to be authenticated and define different roles and rules for your application. It's right now, anyone can read and write any of this data here, but if I maybe I can only if you are the user ID matches the owner ID, then you can actually make a read or write that data, right? Or maybe everyone can read it, but your user ID gets a match.
Interesting.
So with MongoDB, the way to do that is defining roles of who can access that data. But if you're rolling your own, so let's take a look at my example where I rolled my own here. You would have the person who's maintaining that GraphQL endpoint, you would have to put that authentication logic in here. So right now, if you query this to delete to do, cool, you'd have to put a check in here first to see are they authenticated or not, before you actually go and make that request. Is this person logged in? Do they have the right session ID? Do they have the right elevated privileges to get this data or whatever? You'd have to be the person would be defining that.
So back along with what we said with kind of enforcing the schema in the application layer, you're also enforcing the data security and roles in the application layer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. And a lot of people, so this thing, I'm defining how to get this data. Most of when I implemented bringing GraphQL to it was a RESTful service. What we did was we just hooked up all the REST endpoints that already existed in here, and we just passed through the data that we needed to get that data. So we kind of got that request working correctly here. And with the sub-servers kind of managed their own authentication or whatever. So the teams that managed that kind of still had nothing changed from their perspective, but we're just hooking up their 8 REST endpoints here. So yeah, you can put that wherever you want, but if you're managing your own, you could use wherever you're making sure someone's safe on your application. I'd keep it there.
So we're coming up here towards the top of the hour. I want to give chat here an opportunity. If you have any questions that you haven't gotten in, make sure to get those in here in the last few minutes. And Joe, is there anything we haven't covered or we haven't went through that you want to be sure to mention? Any other Mongo services that are going to change our lives or change our apps that we haven't went over so far?
Yeah, you posted this app on here. I think this is a good place. If anyone's curious about getting started with GraphQL, like I said, I think this is a good application to get started on. Hit me up online or Twitter. I'd for sure try to do that. And let's see here. I'm trying to think about new stuff we have out. No, I don't think so. No.
I have a question.
Yeah.
To someone who's trying to figure out what to do for their next application, what would you advise them when MongoDB is the best fit? What does it do the best?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different great use cases for it, and it depends. I use it. especially like I just use it if I just need to put some data in and get it out pretty quickly. Just because like using a document model is just easier for my brain. I don't have to use an ORM. It's less code, less abstraction. I'm already used to using it. But it works really well for like analytics, IoT projects. I built this little LED cube that's using MongoDB on the back end.
Yeah, I remember writing a lot of business logic that would translate the structure of a relational database into what was actually needed. And the ability to do that in more of a document perspective seems like it cuts out a whole class of code that just doesn't have to be written or maintained.
Actually, this is true of GraphQL and SQL databases, but like, so GraphQL and ORMs are like an abstraction layer, and like they can be really helpful, but you can't, whenever you have any abstraction in your code base, it adds an initial startup code, and it's more code for your project to have to maintain. It's like your data is running through more lines of code. There's more things that could go wrong. I always try to do like the minimum amount of code as humanly possible. So it's easiest to maintain long term.
Yeah, true story. That same education provider, I got dropped into a project where the database would fall over every day between 10 and 4 p.m. Not that that's an important time or not.
Yeah.
It turns out the root cause of this was some developer was using an ORM and they were looping over a query 938 times. And when you did that enough times and enough requests, it could crash the application server. But they had no idea this was going on because it was magic to them.
You absolutely nailed it. Like, I think that like it worked, like an ORM works great for most applications, but like if you're starting to scale, an ORM is doing a lot of magic, and you lose control over your database structure and like how things are split up and indexes and queries. Like, and you're right, like some weird shit that you have because you don't see it anymore. I don't know. I prefer like the least, and I'm gonna say this too with GraphQL. Like GraphQL is probably not great for one project. Like if it's just me, myself, and maybe one other person, REST is honestly probably easier because it's like it's another thing I have to maintain and work on. GraphQL really shines at massive scale with a ton of different backend teams, like a lot of different front-end developers and a lot of changes happening. That's where you're going to be getting a lot of benefit out of it. But you
we
can
have a
avoid abstraction.
GraphQL show coming up in January. I'm excited to see that.
Oh yeah, totally. Me too. Yeah, it's yeah.
Well, Joe, this has been great. I haven't seen no other questions in chat other than what we've already covered and asked so far. I know we like to end with just any plugs, anything you want to do, or any things you want to mention, like Twitter handle, if people want to follow you,
Yes.
MongoDB Resources. Why don't you give us like a dump of things you want to plug, things you want people to buy, all that sort of stuff.
I don't even think people will buy. If anyone wants to follow me, my username here, it's my Twitter username at JoeKarlsson1. I make a lot of TikTok videos. I post all those on Twitter too, so you don't have to follow me on TikTok if you're doing that too. There's not many software developers on there, but there's a couple. I'm going to send TJ these links too. We just launched developer.mongodb.com. That's where I'm doing most of my writing these days. It just has cool little let's see here, it was a private chat. It's just like articles, whatever. Also, if you have questions about MongoDB, or if you're trying to get the GraphQL endpoint set up, you're getting stuck, go to community.mongodb.com. That's where like our community forums are. It's a really friendly place to do that. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's it.
Yep. And I made sure to put those links over in the chat. So if you're watching this live, you can check those out there. And if you're watching this on YouTube later, we'll get those in the description. So you should be able to scroll down and find those there. Dan, do you have a plug to give?
I have the plug for this sweet sweater.
I want one.
Like I said, the Enterprise React newsletter is something all our developers submit articles for. So if they think it's cool, you probably will too. So check out the link for that. And we never spam or sell your email address.
You've got the SEO covered too, because I search Enterprise React newsletter for finding it here, and you come up number 1. So you nailed that.
Number 1, baby.
I've earned my sweater.
That's right.
And I'll just go ahead and toss the React Wednesday site in here. So if you enjoyed this chat at all, we do this every Wednesday, 1 o'clock. We hang out. We bring in cool people like Joe to talk about tech they know really well. So next week, actually, we'll do like some sort of like holiday edition. It's just going to be Dan and me. We're just going to hack on something. We're not totally sure exactly what we're doing quite yet. And then into the new year, we got some pretty good shows lined up. We've got Jamie Birch to talk about React Native Script, which is going to be some fun. We've got Eve Porcello to talk about GraphQL. So that'll be on January 13th. We're talking with Tyler McGinnis. We're going to have him on sometime in January. We're just setting a date up for that as well. So some fun times. If you're interested, check out the site. There's ways you can get these things on your calendar and such. So make sure to check that out. But all right. Thanks one more time, Joe. This is great. Definitely learn more about Mongo.
Yes.
Had some fun.
Oh, this is a blast. I hope I can come back someday. I had so much fun here today.
Excellent. It was good having you.
All right. Until next time, everybody. Have a good one.
Adios.